Welcome back, Biology, to Chapter 21, Section 2. This section is a little weird because all that's going to happen is I'm going to go through a couple pictures, as you can see here. I'm going to go through a couple pictures of each of these like categories of plants, and you're going to see some of them, and I'm going to read a description to you. And that's honestly just about it. There's not a lot of learning how cycles work, or there's honestly not that much vocab either. We're just being introduced into what they look like and some of the characteristics specifically to that group of plants. So let's go ahead and go for it, starting up here. So first we're going to look at some nod-seed plants. And the first group up is the Hepaticophytes, which you see on the screen right now. These include small plants commonly called liverworts. Their flattened bodies resemble the lobes of an animal's liver. Liverworts are non-vascular plants that grow only in moist environments. Water and nutrients move through a liverwort by osmosis and diffusion. Studies comparing the biochemistry of different plant divisions suggest that liverworts may be the ancestors of all plants. There are two kinds of liverworts, thallose liverworts and leafy liverworts. Thallose liverworts have a broad body that looks like a lobed leaf, whereas leafy liverworts are creeping plants with 3 rows of thin leaves attached to a stem. And here we see a couple pictures of those. Hepaticophyta. What a fun name to say. Continuing with the non-seed plants, the non-seed plants. Anthocerophytes are also small thallose plants. The sporophytes of these plants, which resemble the horns of an animal, give the plants their common name, hornworts. These non-vascular plants grow in damp, shady habitats and rely on osmosis and diffusion to transport nutrients. Kind of look almost like mossy, like they'd hang out near like a lake or something like that. Next up, we have bryophytes, or bryophyta. These are the mosses. They are non-vascular plants that rely on osmosis and diffusion to transport materials, just like the other two. However, some mosses have elongated cells that conduct water and sugars. Most moss plants are less than 5 centimeters tall and have leaf-like structures that are usually only 1 to 2 cells thick. Their spores are formed in capsules. I think mosses look really neat. Imagine having a moss garden like that. I think that's so cool. That's like totally elves and fairies and stuff like that. Look at that. Imagine, I want to roll in that moss pile. It's a little weird. Okay. It looks so soft. After that, we have the xylophytes, known as the whisk ferns. These consist of thin green stems. The xylophytes are unique vascular plants because they have neither roots nor leaves. Small scales that are flat, rigid, overlapping structures cover each stem. The two known groups of xylophytes are tropical or subtropical, and only one group is found in the southern United States. These are a little weird. Yep. Next up, we have the lycophytes, or Lycophyta. These are called club mosses. They are vascular plants adapted primarily to moist environments. They have stems, roots, and leaves. Their leaves, although very small, do contain vascular tissue. Species existing today are usually less than 25 centimeters high, but their ancestors grew as tall as 30 meters and formed a large part of the vegetation of Paleozoic forests. In fact, the plants of these ancient forests have become part of the coal that is now used by people for fuel. So we have these guys to thank, although it's really their older brothers that were 30 meters tall rather than 25 centimeters tall, but you know, who's counting? Next up, we have the arthrophytes. These are the horsetails. They are vascular as well. Remember, every time I say vascular, that means they have those tubes to transport water and nutrients. They have hollow jointed stems surrounded by whorls of scale-like leaves. The cells covering the stems of some arthrophytes contain large deposits of silica, which is like pretty interesting because silica you can kind of make glass out of and stuff like that. I'm not saying that these plants are glass. They have silica in them. Although primarily a fossil group, about 15 species of arthrophytes exist today, and all modern versions are small, but the fossilized version of them are the size of trees. So just like the previous Lycophyta, these two used to be a lot bigger back in the day. So those are all the non-seed plants. Everything we just looked at does not have seeds. They just rely on spores or some other type of reproduction, but they do not use seeds. Next up, we're going to look at the seed. Oh, I'm sorry. These guys jumped in. Not seed yet. This is also still non-seeds. The Pterophytes. These are ferns. They are the most well-known and diverse group of the non-seed vascular plants, and they were abundant in the Paleozoic and Mesozoic forest. They have leaves called fronds that can be anywhere from 1 centimeter to 500 centimeters. The large size and complexity of fronds is one difference between the pterophytes and the other groups that we just went over. Although ferns are found nearly everywhere, they grow mostly in the tropics. Aside from mosses, you guys are probably most familiar with these non-vascular plants. Like, these aren't uncommon. If you ever find one, look on the bottom, you'll see their spores. It's kind of cool. Okay, so that is a non-seed plant because you can see their spores. Now we are going to the seed plants. Up first, we have the Cichids, or the Cichidophyta. There's about 100 species of these. They are palm-like trees with scaly trunks and can be short or more than 20 meters in height. Cichids produce male and female cones on separate trees, which is pretty interesting. Cones are scaly structures that support male or female reproductive structures. The cones can be as long as 1 meter. Seeds are produced in female cones, and male cones produce clouds of pollen. So that's pretty interesting that they have male and female on different trees. For plants, that's interesting. For animals, we kind of expect that. But for plants, that's not necessarily the case. Next up, we have the Cnidophytes, which I find pretty neato. There are three groups of Cnidophytes. This includes about 30 species of tropical trees and climbing vines. There's a bunch that grow as little shrubby plants in the desert. There's even one that grows in the deserts of Southwest Africa. This guy looks so depressed. Look at this. Imagine being a plant, but this is what you look like. Look, he looks so sad. He looks like he's washed up, but this is just in the desert, just chilling, so. I never thought I'd feel bad for a plant, but I kind of feel bad for this one. Next up, we have Ginkgophyta, which is probably, in my opinion, the most interesting thing you're going to learn today. This division only has one living species, called the Ginkgo biloba, a distinctive tree with small fan-shaped leaves. These have male and female reproductive structures on separate trees, which again is pretty strange for plants. The seeds produced on female trees have an unpleasant smell, so ginkgos planted in city parks usually are male trees. They are hardy, which means they are resistant to insects and air pollution. Something really interesting about them, up until the 1500s, we considered them extinct, but then we found some in a Chinese monastery. The monastery kept some of them because they were pretty good at not dying when fires happened, and that was the only place we found them. So we started taking them from there. We grew them in Europe. We grew them in the New World in like the 1700s, like we're in like the East Coast of the United States, like the 1700s. And they don't have any relatives. Like, yeah, they're a tree, but there's no trees that are similar to it. There's only one species of this group. And they're so resistant that you can grow them in cities, and they don't really mind all the nasty gunk in the air. They'll just keep growing. There's actually one that started growing out of the rubble of where we dropped the atomic bomb in Japan. So like a kilometer away from the one of the blast sites, one of these plants started growing after that. So that says a lot about how well these things can survive and how strong they are, and probably why it's still around, but none of its relatives are. You can see its leaves are kind of unique. I just find it so cool that we have fossil evidence of these things from who knows how long time ago, and there's only one group of it left, one species of it left. All of its relatives went extinct except for this version. And the version that is left is incredibly good at surviving pretty much everything, which is pretty amazing. Okay, so next up we have Coniferophyta. These are the conifers, or cone-bearing trees, such as pine trees, fir trees, cypress, and redwoods. Conifers are vascular seed plants that produce seeds in cones. Species of conifers can be identified by the characteristics of their cones or leaves that are needle-like or scaly. Bristlecone pines, the oldest known living trees in the world, are members of this plant division. Another type of conifer, the Pacific yew, is a source of cancer-fighting drugs. So they're not just there for Christmas trees. There's actually a lot of uses for some of this stuff. But I'm sure you guys know what these are. You have all come in contact with some conifer in your life. And lastly, the anthophytes. These are commonly called the flowering plants. These are the largest and most diverse group of seed plants living on Earth. There's approximately 250,000 species of anthophytes, and according to the theory of evolution, they are probably the last of all the plants to evolve, if that makes sense. So according to the theory, these are the newest types of plants compared to all the other ones. There's a crazy different amount of them. I mean, think of any flower you've ever seen, and those are all like different species of this group. So there's quite a lot. So once again, the Hepaticophyta, Anthocerophyta, Bryophyta, Xylophyta, Lycophyta, Arthophyta, and Pterophyta. So all those guys do not use seeds. They use spores or something else. But the Cicarophyta, Cnidophyta, Ginkgophyta, Coniferophyta, and Anthophyta all use seeds. And usually what you think of a plant is probably one of these guys. Honestly, it's probably this. But those are the two main differences between the non-seed plants and the seed plants. And that's it for this video.